Order! Calm yourself, man! The lion must get back in its den! Order!
Hello and welcome back to my semi-regular review of Prime Minister questions. You people seem to like it for some reason. So, what are we likely to hear about this week? Well, there's no surprises if you've been following the news. Keir Starmer is inevitably going to be going in on the Tory donor Frank Hester, who made what are alleged racist comments about Diane Abbott, who's not currently a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party, but she was the Deputy Prime Minister under Jeremy Corbyn. So let's just get right into it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the legislation on the post office scandal? Mr. Speaker, this week we lost.
So in the on-running scandal over the post office, Kemi Badenoch has announced that all convictions against the sub-postmasters will now be quashed, which is obviously good news all round, and fair play to the government for seeing it through, even if it did take an ITV drama to force their hand.
Lost the formidable Tommy McAvoy. He served his hometown of Rutherglen and the Labour government with loyalty and good humour, and we send our deepest sympathies to his wife Eleanor and their family. We also learned that the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead will be taking her well-deserved retirement.
If you're not familiar with the parliamentary rules, you don't name MPs inside the chamber. So when Starmer says the Honourable Member for Maidenhead, he's referring to the former Prime Minister Theresa May, who will be stepping down as an MP at the next election.
She has served this House and her constituents with a real sense of duty, and her unwavering commitment to ending modern slavery is commended by all of us. We thank her for her service.
So there is a great debate to be had about Theresa May's time in the Conservative government. Arguably, as Home Secretary, she set the groundwork for the hostile environment that her successors, Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, have taken to new extreme levels. As Prime Minister, she probably had an impossible job of trying to unite Remainers and Brexiters inside her Conservative Party. But this isn't really about Theresa May. You know, maybe we'll make a whole video on that one day.
Is the Prime Minister proud to be bankrolled by someone using racist and misogynist language when he says the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington makes you want to hate all black women?
So no real surprises there. Keir Starmer going straight in on the Frank Hester story.
Mr. Speaker, the alleged comments were wrong, they were racist, and he has now, as I said, the comments were wrong, they were racist. He has rightly apologised for them, and that remorse should be accepted, Mr. Speaker. There is no place for racism in Britain, and the government that I lead is living proof of that.
So the problem that Sunak's got is that Frank Hester is the largest single donor to the Conservative Party. I think we know where Starmer's going to go next with this.
Mr. Speaker, the man bankrolling the Prime Minister also said that the member for Hackney North should be shot. How low would he have to sink? What racist, woman-hating threat of violence would he have to make before the Prime Minister plucked up the courage to hand back the £10 million that he's taken from him? Prime Minister.
As expected, Starmer has gone in on the £10 million that he has donated to the Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, the gentleman apologised genuinely for his comments, and that remorse should be accepted. But he talks about language. He might want to reflect on the double standards of his deputy leader, calling her opponents scum, Mr. Speaker. His shadow foreign secretary, the shadow foreign secretary, comparing Conservatives to Nazis, Mr. Speaker, and the man that he wanted to make Chancellor. The man that he wanted to make Chancellor talking about lynching a female minister. His silence on that speaks volumes.
So that was not a particularly strong answer from Sunak, because there was no suggestion in that he would ever pay back the money that's been given to the Conservative parties. And that is definitely something Labour will use. Now, the comments that he was referring to, Angela Rayner mouthing under her breath, Tory scum, is hardly comparable to calling for a black woman to be shot. The Shadow Foreign Secretary he was referring to, comparing the Tories to Nazis. Well, he wasn't comparing all Tories. This was David Lammy, who was talking about the ERG, the European Research Group, a particularly hard right faction, one of many factions that exist within the Conservative Party. And the final comment from John McDonnell was a story he was relating about how people in Liverpool had commented to him about Esther McVey back in 2014 about, rather than sacking her from government, she should be lynched, which is obviously not a good comment for anyone to be making. But Starmer might point out that John McDonnell has never been a part of his shadow cabinet.
Mr. Speaker, the difference is he's scared of his party. I've changed my party. And Mr. Speaker,
that seems to be a frequent line that Starmer is coming out with, that he has changed his party while Sunak is afraid of his. In the light of recent anti-Semitism that's been happening with Labour candidates and everything happening in relation to Gaza and Palestine, that is something that Conservatives could potentially try and use against him. So, yeah, we'll have to see.
I want to hear both the Prime Minister and lead the opposition. Here's Tom.
2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister invited himself into everyone's living room at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening. No one asked him to give that speech. He chose to do it. He chose to anoint himself as the great healer and pose as some kind of unifier. But when the man bankrolling his election says the member for Hackney North should be shot, he suddenly finds himself tongue-tied, shrinking in sophistry, hoping he can deflect for long enough that we'll all go away. What does the Prime Minister think it was about the hundreds of millions of pounds of NHS contracts given to Frank Hester by his government that first attracted him to giving £10 million to the Tory party in the first place?
Prime Minister.
So Starmer is going really hard on the on the Hester story and rightly pointing out that the government has indeed awarded his companies with £500 million worth of government contracts. Very much a tit for tat.
Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely not going to take any lectures from somebody who chose to represent.
So I'm not going to take any lectures has basically become bywords in Prime Minister's questions for I don't have an answer to that question.
Present an anti-Semitic terrorist group, Hizb ut-Tahrir, who chose to serve a leader who let anti-Semitism run rife.
So I want to correct something. He just spoke about Keir Starmer's legal career when he represented a group called Al-Azhar, who are now prescribed as a terrorist group. So this is something Conservatives have been going in a lot on over the last few months, Starmer's career as a barrister. Unfortunately, that means they are misrepresenting the whole legal profession. Because what they have in the law is what's called a cab rank rule, which basically means any lawyer who is qualified to defend a suspect is duty bound to do so. And actually, it's a very important part of British law because everybody has the right to a fair trial. So if he wasn't representing these reprehensible groups, then the justice system would fail because the defendants would rightly claim they haven't been given their right to a fair trial. But like I say, this is something Conservatives have been continually misrepresenting.
In this Labour Party, those are his actions, those are his values, and that's how he should be judged.
And again, Sunak did not say at any point he would be giving back the £10 million.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is he's describing a Labour Party that no longer exists. I'm describing the man who is bankrolling their upcoming general election.
Keir Starmer.
They can shout all they like. 2 weeks ago, he marched them out like fools to defend Islamophobia. And now the member for Ashfield is warming up the opposition benches for them.
The member for Ashfield is Lee Anderson, who was removed from the Conservative Parliamentary Party for his Islamophobic comments, and he has since become a member of Reform UK, which is the new name for Nigel Farage's old Brexit party.
And yesterday he sent them out to play down racism and misogyny until he was forced to change course. He won't hand the money back. He won't comment on how convenient it is that a man handed huge NHS contracts by his government is now his party's biggest donor. You have to wonder what the point is of a Prime Minister who can't lead and a party that can't govern. And Mr. Speaker, national insurance contributions fund state pensions and the NHS. So is the Prime Minister's latest unfunded £46 billion promise to scrap national insurance going to be paid for by cuts to state pensions or cuts to the NHS?
That was a bit of a long rant from Keir Starmer, talking about Frank Hester before eventually pivoting to the question about the proposed cuts to national insurance, which is inevitably going to have a dramatic impact on the NHS and access to mental health services.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad he's brought up the budget. It's about time that he spoke about his plans, because what have we heard, Mr. Speaker, from the Shadow Chief Secretary? The Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury confirmed.
Sorry. Shh, Prime Minister.
The Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury has confirmed that the Labour Party will not be sticking to the Conservative government spending plans. So we now have a litany.
Okay, that's not a massive shocker.
A litany of unfunded promises on the NHS, on mental health, on dentistry, on breakfast clubs, and that doesn't even include the £28 billion 2030 eco-pledge that he's still committed to. But what we all know, Mr. Speaker, is that while we're cutting taxes, Labour's unfunded promises mean higher taxes for working Britain.
Eventually, at some point, Labour will need to reveal their spending plans. But what you may have noticed there was that at no point did Rishi Sunak answer the question about where his spending plans were coming from.
No, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party will not be sticking to its completely unfunded £46 billion promise. And he thinks he can trick people into believing that, but simply shaking the Tory magic money tree will bring it into existence.
Interestingly enough, given that Starmer started with a tribute to Theresa May, the magic money tree was actually a phrase she brought into popularity, which is probably why Starmer is looking over in her direction right now.
Let's be clear, 80% of national insurance is spent on social security and pensions, 20% is spent on the NHS. So he's either cutting pensions or the NHS, or he will have to raise other taxes or borrowing. Which is it, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I know it's not as strong.
So, essentially just the same question from Starmer again.
Point, but if you actually listened to the Chancellor last week, what he would have seen is NHS spending is going up, Mr. Speaker. It's going up. It's a plan that's backed by the NHS CEO, who says that we're giving her what she needs, and at the same time, we are responsibly cutting taxes for millions of people in work. An average worker benefiting from a £900 tax cut, Mr. Speaker. But what I'm hearing for him is he's against our plans to cut national insurance.
Again, no real answer in that from Rishi Sunak as to where his funding is coming from.
The highest tax burden since the Second World War. I did listen to the Chancellor, £46 billion of unfunded commitments. They tried that under the last administration, and everybody else is paying the price. And 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister promised to crack down on those spreading hate. Today, he's shrunk at the first challenge. Last week, he promised fantasy tax cuts. Now he's pretending it can all be paid for with no impact on pensions or the NHS. All we need now, Mr. Speaker, is an especially hardy lettuce, and it could be 2022 all over again. Is it any wonder
A cute reference to Liz Truss there.
that he's too scared to call an election when the public can see that the only way to protect their country, their pension and their NHS from the madness of this Tory party is by voting Labour?
So interestingly enough, this is about the first time I can recall in recent weeks where Starmer has actually called for a general election.
Mr. Speaker, again.
No, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about pensions. Pensions are going up by around £900 in this year. It's this government that's protected the triple lock for the last 10 years. He talks about supporting working people. It's this government that's cutting taxes for every single person in work, Mr. Speaker. It's this government that's investing.
Unfortunately, most people won't get to see any of that saving because it's going to be swallowed up by energy bills, which are going up.
In the NHS, but all we have from him is a £28 billion unfunded promise. Mr. Speaker, I had a look at it. It's here. It's all here. Making Britain a clean energy superpower. He's still stuck to it, Mr. Speaker. And if you look through it carefully, there's billions in spending he's already committed to Scotland, billions for Wales. There's actually money for North London too, I notice. But the problem is, none of it is funded. So why doesn't he come clean and tell him under his plans, Britain people's taxes are going up, Mr. Speaker?
Those spending plans were originally devised 2 years ago on growth projections, but that changed thanks to Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's disastrous budget.
Mr. Speaker, millions of people around the UK and Europe have been inspired by the brilliance of Six Nations rugby. And Premier League clubs like Gloucester Rugby, which were funded during the pandemic through loans authorised by the Prime Minister as then Chancellor, have always been grateful for being kept solvent. But the Prime Minister will also know that the finances of some of these clubs are fragile and that the current loan repayment schemes could be crippling. So will my right honourable friend ask the Sports Minister and the Treasury to...
Yeah, so this is just the fluffball question before we get to the SNP leader Stephen Flynn's question.
Try and find a solution through this so that taxpayer interests are protected and all of us can go on being inspired by top-class rugby for years to come.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right that we stepped in with a £150 million financial lifeline to ensure the survival of Premiership rugby league clubs during the pandemic. And I am told that DCMS is working with Sport England as the agent to talk to borrowers with concerns about their loan agreements, and any ones that do have concerns should contact Sport England in the normal way. But I can also proudly tell him that we are talking to the Rugby Football Union and the Premiership League to secure not just the future of rugby union, but also his local Gloucester Rugby.
Good news if you're a rugby fan.
Come to the leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
So, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to begin by wishing Ramadan Mubarak to Muslims across these aisles. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party have accepted a £10 million donation from an individual who has said that one of our parliamentary colleagues in this chamber should be shot. Why is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom putting money before morals?
So the SNP also going in on the Frank Hester story.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, the comments were wrong. The gentleman in question has apologised for them, and that remorse should be accepted.
Stephen Flynn.
Unfortunately, I don't think the SNP or Labour or the general public in general are going to accept a mere apology. Again, no suggestion that he would ever return the £10 million.
This is complete rubbish. The gentleman in question apologised for being rude. He wasn't rude, he was racist, he was odious, and he was downright bloody dangerous. Now, on Monday, the number 10 said, we've seen an unacceptable rise in extremist activity which is seeking to divide our society.
Sorry, I can't help but notice that when Starmer stands up, he's got a whole book in front of him. Stephen Flynn is reading his questions off a post-it note.
And hijack our democratic institutions. Isn't it extremism that we should all be worried about? The views of those Tory donors that we've read about this week.
Prime Minister. No, Mr. Speaker. there has actually been a rise in extremist activity that is seeking to hijack our democratic institutions. It's important, it is important that we have the tools to tackle this threat. That's what the extremism strategy will do, and I would urge him to wait for the Community Secretary to release the details.
Well, that was an interesting answer from Rishi Sunak, because it's essentially what he sacked Lee Anderson for just 2 weeks ago. So that's the end of this week's PMQs. I only really cover the main bits, but I think it was a good day for Starmer. There is a lot coming out of that. That's going to be very difficult for Sunak. Labour are going to keep pressing on the Frank Hester story for as much gain as they can get out of it. And Sunak has very much painted himself into a corner with his refusal to return the money that's being given. So that was a clear win for Starmer. I hope you've enjoyed this. Hopefully we'll be back again next week. You have any comments you like to make, please put them below. If you enjoy this, please feel free to like and subscribe, and help an angel get its wings by hitting the notification bell. And if there's someone you don't like, maybe you could share this video with them. Till next time, bye.
Order!